Have you ever heard of the Warsaw Pact? Have you ever heard of NATO? Well, I guess so. Have you ever heard of the Shanghai Cooperation organization founded in 1996? No? Interesting. I'm the political ferret, and I'm going to tell you about them. Well, before we can go into that, a little jump into history. You know that the Cold War was communists versus capitalists. Well, that's not entirely true. It was, of course, a conflict between blocs. But China was in a strange way closer to the West Bloc than to the East Bloc, at least from a Soviet perspective, while very East Blocky from, say, a Japanese perspective. So we would have to talk about two different East Blocs, with two different agendas, two different sets of friends, allies, and enemies. I will do a proper video regarding these two blocs, but now, just in a nutshell, how does it came to that? Well, the first leader of communists, and this is widely accepted, was Lenin. And after him, Stalin. And while Stalin was kind of a control freak and tried to order Mao Zedong, the leader of the Chinese communist revolution, around, well, Mao ignored him for the largest degree. After Mao succeeded, he oriented his reforms on the Soviet Union, but since China wasn't Russia, Mao started to formulate his own strategies. And in 1953, Stalin died. So, you see, Mao accepted him as a leader of the movement because, well, he was longer in charge. So from his perspective, it was now his turn. But Russia, under Khrushchev, denied this. In essence, it was the hurt ego of Mao that drove China away. Khrushchev, who came after Stalin, wanted change to a bit more, let's say, free society. And away from this idea that communists should rule the world and this rule must be the result of a conflict with capitalism. Mao disagreed, of course, to that. So it was, on the Russian side, the idea of live and let live. China did not agree to that. They wanted a world revolution. Between 1959 and 1962, those two natural partners broke up because, keep this in mind for later, because China thought that Russia went too soft on the West. Keep also in mind that China was at this time no match for the Soviets. In 1969, that there was an armed conflict at Ussuri between China and Russia. It was minor, but it could have evolved to nuclear level. Never heard of that too, huh? In 1972, Nixon went to China, and from that on, the relation between those two were pretty good, but the border issues between China and Russia were still a problem. You see the dilemma? Well, let's jump ahead. The Shanghai Five Group was created in April 26, 1996. With the signing of the Treaty of Deepening Military Trust in Border Regions in Shanghai by Kazakhstan, China, Kyrgyzstan, Russia and Tajikistan. But it was not much more than a non-aggressive treaty. Uzbekistan joined in 2001 and the treaty was then upgraded, more or less, to a cooperation treaty. We are talking now about 60% of the landmass of whole Eurasia. In 2005, India, Mongolia, Pakistan attended to a summit. We are talking now about the leaders of about half the population on Earth on one table. And by 2017, the SCO initiated over 20 large-scale projects related to transport, energy, telecommunication, holding meetings regarding security, military, defense, foreign affairs, economy, culture, and so on and so on. The structure is, oh well, no, I won't bore you with the bureaucratic details. In essence, the head of the organizations are the heads of the states. But what I love in this is the Regional Anti-Terror Structure, acronym RATS. I really like them. Okay, so there is an organization, so who cares? Well, you remember the conflict between the Russians and the Chinese? Solved. Russia is not communist anymore, so the problem who leads the communists is solved, regarding the Russians at least. The border conflict, well, solved. In fact, it was just a conflict over quite some worthless islands and some other spots not even worth mentioning. Between 1995 and 2005, the whole issue was resolved. The reasons for fighting now gone. And with America in, let's say, a bit euphoric mode, the East did come together again. Well, and the organization started to work together also on military levels, sharing intelligence, information, joint military exercises. The first one was held in 2003. War games, maneuvers, and the resurrection of the Russian strategic bomber fleet. In Putin's words of 2007, starting today, such tours of duty will be conducted regularly and on strategic scale, and our pilots have been grounded for too long. They are happy to start a new life. Well, economy. This would be a video for its own, but the most integral idea is a free trade zone. Well, China is pumping right now billions in other SCO states to improve their economy. And they have quite an interest in gaining other markets for their products. So, who has interest in joining them? Well, India and Pakistan are on the job. Afghanistan, Belarus, Iran, Mongolia are 2 steps behind. But now to the interesting groups, the dialogue partners: Armenia, Azerbaijan, Cambodia, Nepal, Sri Lanka and Turkey. And the interesting part here is Turkey. So what about Turkey? Well, there are 2 things to it. First, it's a NATO state and it's next to Russia. This has benefits for the NATO. So if the Turkey leaves NATO and joins the SCO for military regards, this would be not so nice. Perhaps that's the reason why the Americans pulled out their nukes and stationed them now in Romania. The other thing is economy. Turkey wanted to join and still wants to join the European Union, but since Turkey was transformed more or less to an Islamic state, well, there are issues right now, and well, the rhetoric is not that nice anyway. And the Syria conflict doesn't make that better, because Turkey hates the Kurds, but the Kurds are quite important for the fight against ISIS. So both the Russians and the Americans tried to cooperate with the Kurds, and it looks like some of the Kurds worked with the Russians and then with the Americans and then again with the Americans and with the Russians. To say it is complicated is an absolutely understatement. I will be very happy in about 20 years we have all the information to know when, who fight whom. Right now, which it's just a giant mess. But however, the Turks hate the Kurds and the Kurds hate the Turks and the Kurds want an own state. Well, whoever promised them to give them something close to a state, they will ally with. And it looks like the Americans promised him something like that, and this led to resentments from the Turks. America did already remove nukes from Turkey to Romania. This tells quite a story. But if a NATO state would go east, what's that for a signal for, let's say, the Middle East? Well, guys, we are since about 1990 quite used to the idea that there is only one bloc left, and that's the West Bloc. Everybody else stands for its own. Guys, this world is gone. The African Union, founded in 2002, did not become a factor, but the new East Bloc is already a factor. And if you look to what happens right now, take this into account. I mean, it's a reason that it is called Shanghai Treaty. The Chinese are in charge. China was a long time drawn to America because they feared Russia. They don't fear them anymore. They are like an old couple that reunited after divorce. They are together now, and this bond is stronger than ever. The dependency of America to the production capabilities of China are enormous. And the dependency of Europe to the Russian gas is even worse. And what has the West to give? Worthless paper, IOUs that we can't pay. Well, I believe that the SCO is indeed a defensive instrument, a thing to ensure security. I don't think it's offensive. Russia has very limited options for projecting power, which means fighting a war on the other side of the globe. You need bases for that, you need aircraft carriers, you need troop transporters. All stuff Russia never had quite a focus on that. as a result of the old Soviet war dogma. China is another story. China always played on time in all history. And it has survived everything with this tactic. The world has now strategical poles again. Was this unavoidable? Well, in 2008, Russian President Medvedev showed some interest in Russia joining, take your seat if you're standing, the NATO. With, let's say, quite a lot of opposition from more or less everywhere. But still, Putin asked at some point when Russia will get the invitation to NATO, and got this answer, well, Russia would have to apply first. None of this is an option, you see, because whoever makes the first step would look weak. But still, and NATO evolved to a pact of the North, including Russia, China, and India. Wow, what an idea. Okay, but what does this mean for us mere mortals? Well, I would say what we are seeing here, right here is the beginning of a new Cold War, but this time it will be very hard to sell this as a fight of ideologies. Like always, thanks for watching so far. Subscribe for more, share on social media if you liked it, and have a great day.